just really enjoy Daniel as a person, his character. And I enjoy reading a good guy story. So many of the stories, especially when we went through Kings and all those guys where they do something half good, but then they mess it all up. And I really enjoy Daniel because it's so consistently good. Hey guys, welcome. So we're going to start in Daniel. And Daniel, the very first part of the book of Daniel is a story. But then the second part is mostly prophecy that he had. And not only do I like the story of Daniel and him as a character, but I also like his prophecies. And they're pretty outstanding and kind of helpful to us in understanding the end times. So it's kind of fun in that way. So we're in the book of Daniel. Did you find it? Did you take the time to find it? It might be a little tricky.
I marked it last week.
Okay, good.
Because I knew we were going to be there.
Okay, so everybody there, Daniel. So I'm going to start though by reading in 2 Chronicles. So you don't need to turn to 2 Chronicles unless you want to. But I want to remind you of the history that's leading to the time of Daniel. Okay, so this is the section of history. The very end of 2 Chronicles is going to introduce us to the time that Daniel is. 36:15. The Lord, the God of their ancestors, sent word to them through his messengers again and again, because he had pity on his people and on his dwelling place. But they mocked God's messengers, despised his words, and scoffed at his prophets until the wrath of the Lord was aroused against his people and there was no remedy. That's summarizing what we saw in Kings and in Chronicles, isn't it? He sent messenger after messenger. Sometimes they do right, but then they go back to doing wrong. And the Lord was aroused against his people, and there was no remedy. If God says there's no remedy, you're pretty much at the end of your rope, right? Because an eternal, all-powerful God says there's no remedy for this. You know it's bad news. So verse 17, he brought against them the king of the Babylonians. Who's he? Nebuchadnezzar is the name of the king. Who is the pronoun he here? God brought up against them the king of the Babylonians. Just in case you thought it was the Babylonians who attacked. No, it was God who allowed the Babylonians to attack. Who killed their young men with the sword in the sanctuary and did not spare young men or young women, the elderly or the infirm. God gave them all into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. He carried to Babylon all the articles from the temple of the Lord, of God, both large and small, and the treasures of the Lord's temple and the treasures of the kings and his officials. You need to remember this because at the end of Daniel, we're going to see those treasures sent back by Cyrus. So it's kind of interesting. This is the historical point. And notice that the king in charge at the time of Babylon is going to be Nebuchadnezzar. Let's see, verse 19. They set fire to God's temple and broke down the wall of Jerusalem. They burned all the palaces and destroyed everything of value there. So this is just kind of a summary of the end of what happened. He carried into exile to Babylon the remnant who escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him and his successors until the kingdom of Persia came to power. Remember, there was Assyria, Babylon, and then Persia. It took. The land enjoyed its Sabbath rest. All the time of its desolation, it rested until the 70 years were completed in fulfillment of the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah. The next slide, we're going to read what Jeremiah spoke about the 70 years. Remember that idea, 70 years of rest. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm and also to put it in writing. This is what the Cyrus, king of Persia, says. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah, and any of his people among you may go up, and may the Lord their God be with them. And remember the little cuneiform thing that we saw? So this, in this end of 2 Chronicles, we're seeing kind of a summary of the whole time of Daniel, of what's historically happened during the time. This is the time of Daniel, the time he was taken away into captivity, and in the end, when the people get sent back, we don't hear anything more about Daniel. We don't know what happened to Daniel in the end. Did he come back with other exiles, and did he end up dying in Babylon? He was a teenager when he was taken. He was there 70 years. He might have been too old to want to come back. He might have just stayed where he was and died eventually in that land. We don't know. We don't know anything about Daniel after these historical events. So what we're going to be reading in Daniel is going to be this section that we read in Chronicles that was summarized this time historically. So this is what Jeremiah said. Jeremiah was a prophet, chapter 25, verse 8. Therefore, the Lord Almighty says this, because you have not listened to my words, I will summon all the peoples of the north and my servant Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Now, what does that mean, my servant?
He did his bidding.
He did what God wanted to have him do. This was not, you could say it was Nebuchadnezzar's idea, but God is saying, no, this is I'm allowing this to happen, declares the Lord, and I will bring them against this land and its inhabitants and against all the surrounding nations. I will completely destroy them and make them an object of horror and scorn and an everlasting ruin. I will banish from them from the sounds of joy and gladness, the voices of bride and bridegroom, the sound of millstones and the light of the lamp. This whole country will become a desolate wasteland, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. But when the 70 years are fulfilled, I will punish the king of Babylon and his nation, the land of the Babylonians, for their guilt, declares the Lord, and will make it desolate forever. At this time, no one could imagine that Babylon would be a desolate, because they were huge and powerful and conquering everything in the land. But God is saying, no, in 70 years they're going to be desolate. They'll no longer be. So they couldn't imagine this. And when they're starting this is when Daniel is going, at the same time that Daniel is a young teenager being taken out into captivity, at the same time Jeremiah is making this prophecy. So he's going into this with this prophecy happening at the same time he's being taken out. So Persia becomes God's tool to punish the Babylonians. So the Babylonians are God's tool to punish Assyria, and then the Persia becomes the punishment for the Babylons and takes them over. So I found this really great thing that you can't read. Well, I can read it, but I don't know if you can read it from there. It's a great chart because it shows kind of the history of and the timeline that things are happening. And I try to. I do have a slide that has the reference where you can go and look for it, so you can look online and look for yourself at the chart. But I could not find a way. I tried to print it, I tried to magnify it, I tried to everything. I couldn't make it for you. And I looked through our little books here, and I don't see any of our books that have the same chart. So I'll give you the website, and you can either give me your email and I'll send you the website, or you can write down the website if you would like to look at it. So, but let me tell you about this just generally speaking. So notice the prophets. These are the prophets. Do you see that little blue star there? Those are ones we've talked about, that we've already studied. See right through here? Remember we just did Habakkuk? I don't know what, this is a random one that's out of place. I don't know why it's there. So we have Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Nahum, Micah, Isaiah. These are ones we've done. This should probably be Hosea. Jonah, Amos, Elisha, Elijah, Obadiah, Joel. These are all ones we've read about and studied. So now, today, we're talking about Daniel, who's here. And notice it says this prophecy of Jeremiah about the 70 years. Notice that Jeremiah and Daniel are not dissimilar in time. Before the time of Daniel, Jeremiah's written some of his stuff, or about the same time, because he's during the fall of Jerusalem. Jeremiah is in the city of Jerusalem when it falls. We've got all of Jeremiah and Lamentations that he's there. So you can see how this prophecy of the 70 years happened then, at that time. So then if you look, we still have Ezekiel, and then we have Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, which come later. Here, this part here, this is the destruction of Jerusalem. So here's the first deportation, the second deportation, and then Jerusalem is destroyed. So this happens over time. It's not like an immediate one-time destruction. It happens over time. In the first deportation, the king is blinded and taken away, and later on he's sent back, the king that was there. And then the second deportation, there's like 2 kings that happen in the middle. I'll show you the thing. And then they get drawn out again. So Daniel and his friends, they're left at the first deportation. The first one is when Daniel and his friends are taken captivity. And then this is when the remnant returns. So Babylon ends up falling to the Persians, and this is Daniel 5, and this is the timeline here. And then after that, we have the temple being completed. They construct the temple. And it was so ugly when they built it that they cried after it was done. When the Jews that were coming back saw what terrible shape it was in, they cried at how terrible it looked. But at least it was present. And so this is the intertestamental period, and then we have the birth of Christ. So this is like 400 plus years, 444 years or something in here. This is a lot of years. It's no short time. The intertestamental period, temple completed, yep. So that's where we are right now, and that's the big turning point here. Let's see. Oh, I wanted to mention that in the Christian Bible, the book of Daniel is part of the major prophets. In the Hebrew Bible, the book of Daniel is located in the section of scripture called the Writings. That would include Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, Lamentations, Esther, Ezra, Nehemiah, 1st and 2nd Chronicles would be considered the writings. The reason is likely that Daniel was a court official by vocation rather than a prophet in the classical sense. So some think that might be why. So some people sort it out and say, no, this is definitely a prophet, a book of prophecy. And others say, no. Technically, he was not a prophet. So you can make up your own mind, put it where you want. I made a close-up of the section of the destruction just to show the break in the prophecies and where it happens. Notice that Jeremiah, Lamentations, and Ezekiel are at the end of the second deportation and Jerusalem's destruction. And note that Daniel and his friends were taken at the first deportation. That was in 606. Then they remain until the Persian Empire and Cyrus' decree, and then they disappear. So after their return, there were 512 years from the time the temple is completed until Christ, and 440 years between the time the walls were completed and Christ. So there's different prophecies that talk about how much time it'll be from the time the walls are put back in place or the time that the temple is put back in place. So that's a link to prophecy. Okay, here's what you need to write down if you want to look at this chart yourself. And it's when you look at it off their website, I got it pretty clear, but I could never print it or get it to be different to show you. So it's https://wscoc.weebly.com. And then if you put /miscellaneous-charts.html, you go directly to the chart. If you just go to the website, you see a whole bunch of charts, and several of those charts I think I don't agree with. So it's not like it's not a source that I would choose to get doctrinal information from, but I do like this chart. So. Okay, if you want to give me your email address, I can send the link to you. Okay? Okay. Daniel 1:1. Woohoo! Here we go. Daniel 1:1. Okay? In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. So remember the chart that we have? Was Jehoiakim the last king of Judah? Is he? No, there's 2 more. That's that time period when he's taken, that's the first deportation, but there's still people there in charge. They're supposed to be doing the business of the Babylonian king and taking care of business there. So there's some years here when we have these other guys that are still supposedly the king, but they're under the thumb of the Persian or the Babylonian king. So our passage says the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah. How many years did he reign? Jehoiakim. In the 3rd year this happens, but he reigned 11. So in other words, this happened in the middle of his reign. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, besieged it. Notice there will be 2 more kings before the complete fall of Jerusalem. So the story now is going to leave Jerusalem with Daniel and his friends who were taken captive to Babylon. There's a second deportation, 597, and that's going to include Ezekiel, and eventually Jerusalem will fall completely along with Solomon's temple. After Daniel, we'll go back to Jeremiah and Lamentations to see the actual destruction of Jerusalem, which occurs in the years just after Daniel and his friends are taken. So Jeremiah and Lamentation gives the details of that actual fall of Jerusalem. So we'll come back to that after we do Daniel. So the book of Daniel includes events in Babylon and eventually the Persian Empire for 70 plus years. But there's just a few chapters in the book. So we have to remember as we're reading in Daniel, there's big spaces of time while he's in Babylon, and it's giving us that history. 70 plus years he'll be in Babylon.
But you just mentioned the 70 years of rest.
We're at the Sabbath years. We'll talk about those in just a moment. We don't know what happened to any of the boys at the end of book of Daniel. None of them. They were teenagers when they were taken, and they may have been in their mid-80s by the time you add 70 years, so maybe they just didn't come back. Okay, so, okay, wait, I thought I had a slide here to answer your question. What was your question?
The 7 years rest.
Right, the Sabbath rest. So the Jews, remember in the Old Testament, the Jews were supposed to leave the land every 7th year, was supposed to be a Sabbath rest, which means they weren't supposed to farm it. Now, why would God have told them to do that? We talked about it back in the Old Testament when we read it. What happens when you let the land lay fallow for a year?
It gets more nutrients.
Keeps you from stripping the land, right? If you plant the same crops on the same piece of land year after year, you can strip it of the minerals and things that it needs. So every 7 years they were supposed to have a year of rest of the land. Well, they didn't follow that. And so God is saying, you were supposed to give the land rest. Well, here you go. I'm going to give my land now the Sabbath rest you didn't follow. That adds up to 70. There were 7 times 10 that you didn't do it. So I'm getting it back now. This is the Sabbath rest of the land. You know what it makes me think of? It makes me think of my grandpa telling me that the Sunday is like our Sabbath and we should keep it holy. And we should rest from the normal work of our hands, and not because we're commanded to by law, but because it's what God finds best for us. Have you heard that thinking? What do you think of that? Why can't we take one day of the week that we rest from our labor, from the things that we normally do?
It's lives.
It would be healthy for us, wouldn't it? And we go to church, we do things that inspire us, we have a day that we don't do our regular work. That's a Sabbath rest. If we don't rest on one day a week, and we just work right through 7 days a week, will that catch up to us?
It's real boring.
It can really catch up to you, and it can affect your health and everything, right? It's not a bad thing to take the time to rest. Vern?
My dad was a farmer, and you know, some of the farmers work just all, 7 days a week. But he said if you did that, something would always break down. And, you never got ahead doing that because he tried it both ways, and then it just didn't work. Yeah, it's interesting. We're not bound by the law. We're not bound by the Old Testament law, but the law was supposed to be our teacher. So I think we could learn something from the Sabbath.
from that concept of taking a day that we don't do our regular work, that we rest, or that we spend time with family, that we go to church, we do things like that to kind of keep us going. Not a bad idea, huh?
God even took his day, it was his day of rest, the seventh day.
Thank you.
God can do it, I'm sure. He'll give us a try.
Not a bad idea.
No.
Daniel 1 verse 3. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego. Okay, so let's go back up to verse 4. What kind of person is Daniel? Smart, good looking,
Healthy.
aptitude,
Without
health.
defect.
Pardon?
Without defect.
Without defect. So when we think of Daniel, he's a pretty noble, good looking, smart young man, right? He's not the weeds of the crowd. He would be a good model of, and also the ones that were with him, right? It'd be all of them were of this kind of character. So does he seem to be a bad person?
No.
But why did this bad thing happen to him?
Because he wouldn't follow the king's rules on eating and stuff.
Okay.
Pardon?
He wouldn't follow the king's rules.
Oh, we haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah.
But at this point, why does this bad thing happen? He seems to be a good person, yet he got taken into captivity.
Because God let it happen.
Why?
He just was caught up in the culture that God was going to do this to.
Sometimes we think that if we're good people, no bad thing is ever going to happen to us.
But God's gonna work through him.
He is. And it's going to be hard on Daniel. Being taken into captivity and taken away from his home and all that would have been horrible. Some people argue over whether or not they were castrated. It was common for them to castrate the young men that they brought in, but we don't have any way to know that. We don't have any knowledge of Daniel or the friends ever having family or anything in the land or descendants.
That belief is because they were in the king's house and he didn't want the men messing with his women.
It was a common practice for the Babylonians to castrate people like this that they're going to have serve in the household. So we don't know that though. So just so you know, we don't have anything to except just that was common. So what bad thing did happen that is having this effect on Daniel, even though Daniel is a good guy?
The
the-
nation just turned against God.
The nation did not keep the covenant. The Sabbath years would be the example, right? One example, they were supposed to have let the land rest for 1 year, but they ignored the Sabbath years. And anything else?
Well, the kings all went bad.
They did.
Yeah.
A lot of them did.
Well, most of them.
Yeah, and idolatry and bringing idols into the temple. And we saw so much of that. I mean, it got so much we got, don't say it again. You know, they were worshiping Asherah poles and all kinds of stuff they were doing, right? So God is wreaking punishment on the kingdom. But Daniel's not a bad guy. So why did bad things happen to good people?
It's all written.
Pardon?
It's all already predetermined.
It was
Part
predetermined?
of the plan, God's plan.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I feel like God is big enough to take care of that question. I don't think I need to have an answer. There are some times when you and I are going to be doing the right thing, but because of what our nation does or what people do outside of us, we may have things affect us that are not good. But I think we could probably take Daniel as an example, that God does take care of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He takes care of all of them. And they do pretty well, especially as compared to the people that were suffering in Jerusalem when it fell.
I think it was kind of strategic for him to change their names too. That was not a good thing.
So why was that strategic? What are you thinking?
You strip from them their heritage, their thought process, that's who they are, where they came from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a, like, could be our situation in our country that God can punish a nation for bad things, but he can have a pivot inside of that country, like which Daniel and that they are a pivot, that God has taken his purpose through Israel, that they are the ones that are faithful, like Jeremiah and some of the others.
I also think that sometimes God takes us out so that we don't have to witness what's coming next. I think he's in control of our life and how long it lasts, and I think sometimes he says, I'm going to take Eve out, she doesn't need to see this.
In the New Testament, it says we see through a glass darkly, and that's what that part of that scripture is. We don't quite understand why, but it's in God's plan, and that sometimes there's great joy, sometimes there's suffering, sometimes there's not understanding, but in the end, it's all gonna come out the way that God has planned it and predestined it.
I have another mom story. You know, I was raised in a family of 4 girls. I was the oldest, but we were just like a year apart from each other, so we were all very close in age. And so one time, my mom pulled us together for one of her interventions. You girls, one of you girls has eaten some X-Lax out of the refrigerator. That was not chocolate, that was not candy. One of you ate that X-Lax. Which one of you did it? I mean, it was the big inquisition. We were all just standing there going, I don't know, looking at each other. We didn't know what had happened. And we didn't know what X-Lax was. Then she said it was something like chocolate in the refrigerator. And we were thinking, oh, chocolate's in the refrigerator? Anyway, but it was scary because she was, you know, being very adamant about knowing who did that. Well, she did her all. If you don't tell me, you're going to be so sorry, and I'm going to have to make you throw up so that you don't get sick from that, whatever, and you better let me know who did it, or else you're going to be very, very sick, and, you know, whatever. Well, eventually, my youngest sister, Cheryl, admitted she had eaten it. So then, now, the other 3 of us, we're just watching what's going on. Oh, and then my mom scooped her up, and we were following behind, took her to the bathroom, leaned her over the toilet, and gave her something, I don't know what it was. Habitat, something to make her throw up. And she's leaning over the toilet, waiting we're all watching to see if she's gonna throw up. And then I don't know how old we were. I know we were little because we were in our house in Buckeye. Because I remember the refrigerator, I remember the scene, you know. And but my little sister looked up at my mom and said, Mommy, could you hurry up and throw me up? And then I started laughing because I realized she thought Mom was going to like toss her or something because she was all squatted over and Mom's over her. They're trying to make her throw me up, Mom. Can you hurry up and throw me up?
That's cute.
So the reason I tell that story is because sometimes that's where we are. God knows what he's doing. He's actually told us what he's doing, but we don't really understand it completely. And even though me and my 2 other sisters that didn't have anything to do with eating the X-Lax, we were still stressed and worked up about seeing this happen. And my poor little sister who was having the emergency, she didn't even know what was going to happen. She had no idea when Mom was going to throw her up or how long she had to wait to get thrown up. So I think that sometimes when we are looking at prophecy and some of these things, we don't always understand everything that's around. Daniel could not understand all that was in the works. He's just doing the right thing that he knows to do each day, each time as he goes. And he's continuing. And we need to do the same thing. We need to just continue to do what we do know to do, and then stay open to what God's going to teach us. And he'll throw us up when he's ready to throw us up. It's in his time, and we may not always understand completely what's going to happen. God gave us the prophecies so that we would know that he's doing the work. That was the point. So we would know that he's in control of it. Not so that we can control that time that's coming ahead, or we're supposed to just remain faithful. So as these prophecies and things that we read in Revelations and Ezekiel and Jeremiah about future times, we don't understand that, but we just absorb it and say, okay, well, that'll be interesting. I'll be waiting to see how that all works out. See when God is going to throw us up and we'll be captured in the air.
Excuse me, Peter talks about this and how in Noah's time, he preserved Noah and he destroyed everybody else. And then again in Sodom and Gomorrah, where he saved Job and knows that he can preserve his people in the midst of bad situations. And that's a hope for us, that for us to remain faithful no matter what's going on around us.
God can absolutely do whatever he wants to do, right? God is all powerful. We're fortunate that he gives us the information that he gives us, and we just need to stand in faith from then. So on verse 4, it says that the language and literature of the Babylonians, including the classical literature in Sumerian and Akkadian cuneiform. It was a complicated syllabic writing system. Anybody remember when we heard about Akkadian? I'm going to remind you in a minute. The language of normal communication in multiracial Babylon was Aramaic. It was written in an easily learned alphabetic script. Remember we learned about Habakkuk had an Akkadian name?
Yeah.
Akkadian is an extinct Semitic language. It originates from ancient Mesopotamia region, specifically the city of Akkad. It's named after the city, which was the capital of the Akkadian Empire, the first known empire in Mesopotamia. Remember we looked at how old it was? The language is a member of the Semitic language family. So imagine it's related to Arabic and Hebrew. So Daniel and his friends had a unique kind of edge on learning this language and these old writings from this time. Whereas other captives may have taken from other areas that didn't have knowledge of the Hebrew language or Aramaic may have struggled to be able to read the books of prophecy and stuff that they had in the Akkadian language. So it seems like the Jewish boys had an advantage because Hebrew and Akkadian were similar languages, kind of like Spanish and English. Those are two different languages. But if you know English, Spanish is easier for you to learn. If you know Spanish, English is not that hard to learn. They're similar in makeup. So remember when we studied Habakkuk, we looked at this slide showing Mesopotamia and how old, how ancient it was. And Akkad, the city of Akkad's there where the red arrow is. It was about 4500 BC that the Sumerians built several early centers of civilization, even including the city of Ur. Remember somebody who came from Ur? Abraham came from Ur. So in 3000 BC, the Sumerians created the world's first writing system. This writing, called cuneiform, was a system of characters that pressed signs into tablets of clay. So the Sumerians were probably the first people to make a calendar, which they based on the phases of the moon. So the lunar calendar was later adopted by the early Egyptians and Greeks. Metal tools and weapons were in use in Mesopotamia before 3000 BC. Two-wheeled carts and wheels for pottery making were among the region's other innovations. Ancient Mesopotamia produced one of the first great law codes, the Code of Hammurabi. This set of laws was proclaimed by the Babylonian king Hammurabi, who ruled from about 1792 to 1750. So the boys have a little bit of advantage. these people who took them into captivity probably just thought they were like any other unintelligent people groups that they might have brought. But here you have some boys who do have some education, some knowledge that's going to help them to actually excel within the Babylonian language. So in verse 6 of that same passage, Daniel means God is my judge. Hananiah means the Lord shows grace. Mishael means who is what God is. Azariah means the Lord helps. So those are all important names, right, for the task that's going to be at hand. In verse 7, it talks about the names they were given. So Nebuchadnezzar was trying to assimilate them into their culture. So Belteshazzar probably means Bel, protect his life. Shadrach probably means command of Aku, that's the Sumerian moon god. Meshach probably means who is what Aku is. That's Abednego, means servant of Nego or Nabu. So basically, the king tried to give them names that associated with their gods. But Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So he tried to give them different names that associated with their gods. But verse 8, Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. He asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned you, or this word for your and you is a plural word. So he's speaking to Daniel, but he's speaking to all of them. He's saying, I'm afraid my lord the king, who has assigned y'all food and drink, why should he see you all looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you. Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. So in verse 8 there, where it says, Daniel resolved not to defile himself, the boys, they probably felt the food was contaminated because it was the portion that was offered to the idols. And that was common practice. Also, a portion of the wine was poured on a pagan altar. So like the food was kind of blessed by these other gods. So there were certainly ceremonially unclean animals that were also used and were neither slaughtered or prepared according to the regulations of the Jewish law. So the acceptance of the king's rations may have implied allegiance to the king, and Daniel didn't want to give allegiance to the king. So there's all these, we don't really know exactly what it was because it doesn't tell us exactly, except that Daniel felt like it would be an offense to God. In verse 9, notice who caused the officials to show favor and compassion. So God is working on the other side to kind of push this point. In verse 11, Daniel didn't beg or rebel. He asked and then reasoned with the official. He offered an alternative instead of rebellion. He is a smart boy, isn't he?
He used his cunning.
Yes, yes. And Daniel is confident. Why? Why is Daniel confident?
Because God's on his side.
So the negative thing is they could kill him. From Daniel's perspective, it might be easier if he just right? and being taken away in captivity like this. But he's taken a stand, and by him taking that stand, I bet Daniel was surprised that he didn't get killed. I mean, that would have been just like the king to say, well, forget it, right? But Daniel, and he appears to be respectful in what he's saying to the king, to the guy. He doesn't seem to be like rebellious. So I wonder if Daniel just kind of resolved himself, well, what are they going to do to me? Kill me? Okay. In Genesis 1:15, it says, At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men. Why does it say Genesis? We're not in Genesis, right?
No.
Or Daniel.
I know, isn't that funny? I'll have to change that. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. The other men are probably going, oh, darn, we have vegetables now. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. So Daniel is earning favor with the captors. What did God give the young men?
Lessons.
It says right there, knowledge and understanding, right? He blessed them with knowledge and understanding. And what did he give Daniel specifically?
Visions and dreams.
Visions and dreams. That's going to serve him well as we go further along, right? And that seems to have been different. So with God's help, Daniel and his friends mastered the essential Babylonian literature on astrology and divination on dreams. But in the crucial tests of interpretation and prediction, we're going to see later in chapter 2 and 4, all the pagan literature proved worthless. Only by God's special revelation was Daniel able to interpret correctly. So we see this dual thing happening with Daniel. One, he was given a good knowledge, he could understand and do more than the others. But the other part is God's going to step in and reveal things to him that none of the others could understand. So what has God given you? What has God given you? Some knowledge or skill that you could be perhaps using. I think that's something we should think about. What is it that God has given us? Whatever that is, that's what we should be using. And then it's possible he may give us more things at another time. Things that aren't just natural to us, that we think of as natural. But like Daniel, we should be using what we have, what we can do. You don't see Daniel pulling out a sword and fighting everybody. That's not what he was given to do. That's not what his strength was or what God had given him. He's using what God did give him. Vern?
He gives us our life back. When we go off and chase what the world has to offer, it doesn't turn out well. We go places and do things that we would never do if we were thinking squarely. But when we get in trouble and learn from it and say, I can't do it anymore, and if you can just give up and surrender, then and say, hey, I can't do this, show me. Well, he shows you. He gives your life back. And he gives us the same thing he gave the kids there. He gives us the knowledge and understanding through teaching us and studying his word and going different places than we were going before. We go to the places where we can learn more about him. And it's a life-changing experience. He gives us our life back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a weird sense that by giving up control of our own life, allowing God to control and do what God wants to do, that we actually get our life back. You would think that we're losing it, but we're not losing it, we're actually getting it. We're actually getting our life.
He actually gives us a new life. It's
A
not,
new life.
not
A better life.
It's not an old life made over. It's a completely new life.
Wow. Good point. Verse 18, at the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. How long is that going to be? 70 years. So Daniel was in Babylon the entire time of the captivity, and King Cyrus was the king at the end of the captivity. So right now it's Nebuchadnezzar. So this kind of summary of the time Daniel was in captivity, and in the remaining chapters we're told about specific events that occurred while he's there. So we don't really have a time frame, except we do see the kings going by. So there's years that go by in between. Daniel spent 7 years in Babylonia and was still living in the year 537. He saw the exiles return to Judah from Babylonian captivity. He was likely over 80 years old, but he would have been around to see it happen. That must have been a great thing, huh? After all those years, to see the people going back into the land. Chapter 2. In the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, "I've had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means." Then the astrologers answered the king, "May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it." The king replied to the astrologers, "This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me." Some astrologers were of various ethnic and cultural backgrounds, and they communicated in Aramaic, the language everyone understood. From here to the end of chapter 7, the entire narrative is in Aramaic. These 6 chapters deal with the matters of importance to the Gentile nations of the Near East and were written in a language understandable to them. But the last 5 chapters, 8 to 12, revert back to Hebrew, since they deal with special concerns of the chosen people. Kind of interesting. So we have both Aramaic and Hebrew. This part's in Aramaic. Once more they replied, "Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we'll interpret it." And the king answered, "I am certain that you are trying to gain time, because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then, tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me." The astrologers answered the king, "There is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans." Is this true, that no one on earth is going to be able to do what the king asks? Who can? The God of heaven can tell Daniel. Verse 12. This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. Wait a minute. With wisdom and tact? The guy's coming to kill him, along with all the other wise guys. And Daniel handles it with wisdom and tact. Calm maturity, right? He has God on his side. Verse 15. He asked the king's officer, "Why did the king issue such a harsh decree?" Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went in to the king and asked for time, so that he might interpret the dream for him. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. In verse 18 there, where it says mystery, that's a key word in Daniel. It also appears often in the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Qumran sect. The Greek equivalent is used in the New Testament to refer to the secret purposes of God that he reveals only to his chosen prophets and apostles, like in Romans 11:25 and Revelation 10:7. So you can see that. I'll show you. Here's Romans 11:25. I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters, so that you may not be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the full number of the Gentiles has come in, and in this way all Israel will be saved. So that's that same word, that's mystery. And then in Revelations 10:7, but in the days when the seventh angel is about to sound his trumpet, the mystery of God will be accomplished, just as he announced to his servants, the prophets. So this is the concept here that's being used in Daniel's time. So the prophets announced it, but we don't understand it all the time. So we know that God's in control. He's told us pieces of it, but there's a lot of pieces we don't understand. That's the mystery of God that he's going to accomplish. But Daniel's got a problem. He has to understand this mystery or he's going to be, right? Verse 19. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven, and he said, Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. I think he's happy. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. In 1 John 1:5, it says, God is light, in him there is no darkness at all. Verse 23, I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. Then Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, Do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king. I will interpret his dream for him. Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means. The king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? Daniel replied, No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the days to come. Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind as you were lying in bed are these. So Daniel's making sure he knows it's not him that's doing it, that the God of heaven is giving him the answers to this. So who sent Nebuchadnezzar the dream? God gives the interpretation to Daniel so he can testify to the king. But God was the one who sent the dream in the first place to Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 29. As your majesty was lying there, your mind turned to the things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else alive, but so that your majesty may know the interpretation and that you may understand what went through your mind. Your majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver and gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. Your majesty, you are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. The head was gold, right? The head of gold. By the way, in the next chapter, next lesson, we're going to talk about what Nebuchadnezzar's response was. You know what he does? He builds a statue all of gold. Because he didn't like that he was just the head and there were going to be these other kingdoms that were going to follow. So he builds a statue all of gold. So anyway, let's see, where are we? Verse 39. After you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay, as the toes were partly iron and partly clay. So this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. So the metals that he's using are diminishing value as you go down this statue. And so the rulers of the successive empires are less strong. Nebuchadnezzar is going to be taken out. In the end, there's going to be a democratic system of checks and balances that characterize Roman senates and the Roman times, so the time of Christ. When Rome comes, it's going to be some strong, some weak, and multiple types of people involved in it. So the metal is symbolizing the degree of toughness, but not quality. It would be stronger, tougher, but not of higher quality. Here's a look of one picture of this golden statue. See, the head is one. This scholar is using that for being representing Babylonia. Then the chest of silver is the Medo-Persian, then the Greeks, and then the Romans, and then the kingdom of God in the end. This is out of my, if you have a Bible that has a drawing, this is a common picture illustration you might have in your Bible, commonly used. And it shows the relationship between the other visions that he has also. So the first one is this one right here, where the head of gold, chest of arms. He's going to have another vision in chapter 7, and they're going to be depicted as a lion, bear, leopard, and terrifying, frightening beast. And then in chapter 8, we're going to see a ram and a goat. And then in the end, we'll have this section here, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Those are the kingdoms from now. And this is kind of a timeline. So it's kind of an interesting chart if you've got one of those in your Bible. Verse 44, in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end. But it itself will endure forever. That's us, you guys. This is God's kingdom in Christ. We are going to endure forever. This is the time. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of the mountain, but not by human hands. A rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. So the fifth kingdom is the kingdom of God. That's the kingdom we're in. This is the last portion. Then Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of lords and a revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery. Then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained at the royal court. So does this remind you of what happened to Joseph when he interpreted the dream of the king? Remember, he got put in charge of what?
Everything.
Everything, mainly the food. Remember the grain? And that led to him being able to feed the grain to his brothers when they came to visit. They reunited his family. Yeah. In Genesis, it says, for Genesis 41:41. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took a signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted before him, make way. Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. So very similar, isn't it? So Daniel made sure to get his Jewish friends into positions of administrative authority. Smart and loyal. Daniel is smart and loyal, making sure to put those people in strategic positions, right? Okay, so next time we'll go to chapter 3. We'll start at chapter 3. We'll start seeing the visions. Well, actually, we see more of his story before we start seeing more visions.